Today I won't touch much upon my previous work, arguing that Nabokov was probably correct that the viceroy butterfly is not a mimic of the monarch, but just a look-alike, coincidentally. Although these different patterns really look different, they can be caused by the same basic parameters, and the difference in appearance is just a different stage in the process of pigment diffusion. And today I'm not going to defend Nabokov's claim that the dead leaf butterfly was probably not formed gradually over many generations under the pressure of natural selection, but may have appeared suddenly. I know that seems unlikely, but the chemistry and physics says this pattern is really not that unlikely, and strange coincidences can happen in the course of millions of years. Moreover, this guy doesn't look like the green leaves in his tropical forest, and whenever he sits on the forest floor eating rotten fruit, he tends to beat his wings, which are brightly colored on the other side, so he's really quite conspicuous. These arguments can be found here and here, or in this short video. Today, I'm going to talk about how I found Nabokov's aesthetic sense useful to me in working in the philosophy of biology. His fiction is useful more than his lepidoptery work. The Theory and Practice of Insect Mimicry was the title that Nabokov chose for his lost manuscript on his theory of mimicry. I think the title is meant to be funny. Usually you think of the theory and practice of an art form, not a natural phenomenon, and it hints at his ultimate argument. Nabokov once said that there are three things that go into making a person: heredity, environment, and the unknown agent X. I assume that this unknown X affords the individual some freedom, some escape from the bounds of genetic and physical determinism. X may also be figured as the agent of artistic freedom, the ability to create radically new worlds and to make free choices. In this talk, I will argue that Agent X derives power from ordinary and strange coincidences, like these mimics. And these individual coincidences, as they accrue, they self-organize into order, form, beauty, somewhat predictable patterns. So first, let's look at Nabokov's strange coincidences, chance associations. In The Vane Sisters, an eccentric librarian named Porlock likes to search through old books looking for typos that might transform a sentence into one with an entirely new and different meaning. The example of the typo given is Hitler for hither. I don't know if anyone has thought of some sentences that could work with that. Imagine young Adolf had picked up a book that was supposed to read, "Hither go thee into Poland." He might have interpreted this as a message from someone on high. There is an element of surprise and wonder when we encounter funny coincidences that make a kind of sense. Porlock's friend, Cynthia Vane, suspects that such apparently chance typos might actually be messages from ghosts. Since the age of miracles has passed, and ghosts are unable to break the laws of physics, in order to communicate, they are left merely to tinker with the probabilities that determine chance events. This coincidence is especially funny to us in this context. This is an image that's been going around the internet. It's an upside-down iSmart charger that, according to the person who shared it online, was purchased in Israel. I include this one so I can mention that molecules in biological systems can function differently depending on whether or not they're turned around the right way. This is funny. It could be fake, which doesn't make the picture less funny. It's kind of an art to imagine these kinds of relationships. And of course, there are many coincidences, chance, throughout all of Nabokov's novels. There's, of course, the missed chances in the short story A Matter of Chance. A man on a train passes his lost wife and just misses meeting her. The number 342 in Lolita, I think it's the Hayes home address, it's the hotel room number, the number of places that Humbert and Lolita visit on their travels. And there is, of course, the Fountain Mountain typo in pale fire. Nabokov called these kinds of combinations nature's practical jokes. But some jokes can lead to real effects. The moth happens to be resting on a similarly colored tree bark, inadvertently furthering his own chances of survival. To a bird flying by, the dull moth looks like bark. Coincidental intersections of similar things may form a pattern that can be interpreted by some living being. And these moments are points at which the strict physical determinists, like a Pierre Laplace or a Daniel Dennett, will see predictable trajectories of cause and effect take an unpredictably sharp turn. Many artists describe the creative process in a similar fashion of interpreting chance. Inspired by Nabokov, I decided to try to integrate art and science. While I was working on a PhD in English, I became a visiting researcher at the Santa Fe Institute to study evolution, deterministic chaos, self-organization, artificial life. New scientific tools for re-examining the question of whether or not genuine novelty can emerge, almost like a miracle, from a rearrangement of already existing parts. I learned that with feedback, so-called effectual factors in a nonlinear complex system can make the system become organized and yet unpredictable. But what are effectual factors? What is going on with the individual birds as they respond to each other? The physicists I was working with at the time weren't able to provide an answer to that question in a way that satisfied me, so I kept asking. And now I work in biosemiotics, studying the mysteriously meaningful lives of biological cells. The cell receptor, like an individual bird in a flock, is responding to signals that have qualities which could be similar to other things. Here we see how the wrong molecule, a molecular mimic, may happen to fit into a cell receptor because of a similar shape of the right molecule, the one that the receptor has evolved to bind with. And this can cause a chain of reactions that repurpose that receptor for some other function, chance that mimics choice. Of course, for over a year, this kind of event has been part of our daily discussion about a virus that happens to fit into our ACE2 receptors. It's a parasitic mimic. And now, researchers have discovered a drug that can treat COVID. It's called ivermectin. It's an artificial molecular mimic of an enzyme produced by bacteria, which are our natural pharmacists in our guts. The molecule happens to fit with the virus and our ACE2 receptors, as well as 2 or 3 other molecules that contribute to viral infection or inflammation, which may make it useful for treating other diseases as well. Ivermectin is being called a miracle drug because of all these coincidental, useful associations. It just doesn't seem possible to biotech engineers. It's almost as if when nature engineers a tool, forget precision, it's like she creates a screwdriver that also functions as a pair of scissors or a hammer, depending on context. Nature's precision is based on the usually dependent probabilities provided by context, which might also explain why, when the chemical context is out of balance, strange pathologies can emerge. This is a hot topic in biosemiotics right now. Recently, I've been working on critiques of artificial intelligence, showing how a biological organism, like slime mold, for example, is actually much more sophisticated than any deep learning computer program in terms of being able to adapt. Even the most primitive forms of life that don't have brains, or even neurons, can generalize and make associations. In this paper, my co-authors and I note that researchers claim that a computer can learn when they add pure randomness to the program. Random chances is not at all the kind of interesting chance that we're talking about here. So they add the randomness and then they subject it to a selection process for, say, 300 million iterations, causing the network to learn and evolve. Well, slime mold can adapt almost immediately by leveraging strange coincidences. This is the sort of thing that Nabokov recognized was wrong with the theory of natural selection. Learning and adaptation can happen fast, without gradual pressure from natural selection, by leveraging associations between the qualities and/or the coincidental proximities of things. Making associations is the sort of thing that you think only a mind can do. In this same paper, we report that slime mold has been found to make Pavlovian associations, like with a ringing bell in food. This seems to happen when their chemical oscillators overlap and become coupled. Researchers have tricked slime mold into associating the coincidence of cold with food, or the coincidence of cold with a temporal rhythm. Here we use a butterfly wing eye spot to show what it looks like when chemical oscillators are coupled. Butterfly wings happen to show freeze frames of these processes. You can see that I'm still using my lessons learned from Nabokov. Now that leads to the subject of how individual coincidences self-organize into wave patterns. Butterfly wing patterns are self-organized chemical reactions, standing waves or traveling waves, oscillators that switch back and forth between different colors. For example, this might be a good visualization of the actions of the ordering forces of an agent X. These are bees. Out of the individual actions of bees, a wave pattern emerges and propagates. The pattern is flexible but similar each time. What is the cause of this swarm? Heredity, the environment, and also the individual responses to chance associations, the so-called effectual factors of a complex system, which produce a global mix of regularity and unpredictability. This is the Belousov-Zhabotinsky reaction discovered in the 1950s. Local chemical reactions can create temporal and/or spatial patterns. Self-organizing chemical reactions that switch back and forth between different regimes are common in organisms. Such patterns can themselves come to function as signals at other biological levels. This is what differentially triggers genes, for example. And here we see the same kind of reaction in this specimen. It's clear here because the wing veins are not dividing it up. The chemicals underlying a butterfly wing pattern react and diffuse across the surface of the wing. Nabokov intuitively understood the process so he could predict the types of variations that would be possible in species. These individuals are all the same species. The chemical reaction during development is affected by temperature and humidity. The melanin pigment diffuses longer and switches off to white and then back on again. Reaction diffusion processes are ubiquitous throughout nature. They are even the mechanism by which thoughts and memories are stored in the brain as types of waves and patterns that are created and recreated. Certain whims of nature can only be appreciated by a brain that has developed in a related manner. Exactly. An artist with a poetic sense of humor like Nabokov has a brain that works the way that nature works. Nature's not always logical in terms of classifying things by types. It can process information according to qualities, accidental qualities, that come into a relation. The father's butterfly's addendum to the GIF is perhaps an exaggerated, fictionalized version of Nabokov's own theory of mimicry and origin of species. In Father's Butterflies, Fyodor mentions that ideas can spontaneously self-organize. He compares the process of capillary action to help the reader visualize the process that's going on in the brain. Here, capillary action in chromatography. You can see different mixed up chemicals diffuse at different rates, resulting in separation. You can see the brownish liquid separates into different colors. And I'll quote from Father's Butterflies. A truth had matured that he had not consciously sought, but had harmoniously grown out of an internal association of elements he had gathered. The mystery was only in the very act of association, and akin to capillary action happening, as it were, independently of the gatherer's will. I'll try to summarize Fyodor's father's theory on the origin of species. In the beginning, there is diversity, variety, chaos, out of which some coincidentally similar things might emerge. We can call them mimics. These, being similar, can form relationships. Things that are similar separate from the dissimilar. This is creation by differentiation, from formlessness to form, spontaneously. In Nabokov's novel, Look at the Harlequins, the main character says that his creator seemed sloppy and prone to mistakes. He says his life resembled a clumsy conspiracy with nonsensical details thrown in. The main plotter constantly made inept moves that seemed to preclude the slightest possibility of success. Yet, out of these very mistakes, he unwittingly wove a web that fulfilled the destiny, the aim of the plot. And that's how strange coincidences add up to sense. You don't really often hear people saying that Nabokov wrote in the style of naturalism or realism, but I say he did capture a reality that so-called realists haven't understood.